Hello, everybody. Welcome to session 3. You can probably hear some tins banging around as my small person is getting herself some snacks. It is 11's time after all. So delighted to be joined by Alexander, who's going to be talking to us about a Project Drawdown. It would help if I could say it. There's the chat box on the right-hand side there, guys, if you haven't been on the earlier talks. So that's a great place to sort of chat with each other. I know Alexander's going to, he's quite keen for you to ask questions as you go along. So that's brilliant. You can either ask questions in the chat box or you can actually click on the ask a question thing at the bottom on the menu there. And that will just stop questions from getting kind of lost in the chat. So that can be helpful as well. And yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Alex. I will mute myself and let's go. I'm excited for this one to learn all about it.
Great. Well, Jen, thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. I just want to thank Jen again for the invitation to speak today and to speak to all of you. So thank you for taking the time to join us in this session. I just want to try and make my screen a bit bigger so this becomes the bigger one. Let's see how I do this. On the instructions, there was a part where I could actually make it bigger, but that button doesn't seem to appear now, annoyingly. Let me just, if I drag it across, does that happen?
You can try turning your camera off and then
okay, let me do that and see if that works. Yeah, there we go, perfect.
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine, me, Jen, if that's all right with you. Great. Lovely, thanks for that. So just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Alexander. I am the founder of two organisations, one called Zero Waste Mindset, which is a sustainability training and events company. Second is
on there, Alexander. Sorry, we're not seeing.
Sorry, say again.
That's it. So there was one point there where we could see your notes as well, but now it's back to just being the title power.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. So can you see my notes now?
No.
Okay, good, perfect. Sorry. I run two organisations: Zero Waste Mindset, which is a sustainability training and events company, and also an organisation called Zero Waste London, which is a community organisation to do with zero waste. But you probably think, well, what's this got to do with Project Drawdown? You know, what's Zero Waste got to do with Project Drawdown? Well, there are overlaps, but I am on a mission to reverse global warming in my lifetime. And over the last couple of years, my colleague and I, Delia, have been running Zero Waste London, and we've grown it to be now the biggest zero waste community in the country, which we're very proud of. And in that time, lots of amazing things have been happening in the zero waste world. There's lots of organisations doing great things here in the UK. And so I've been looking to see what else I can do, because I feel there's lots of people now who've picked up the baton and run with it. And I'm going to continue to work with Zero Waste Mindset and Zero Waste London, but I've also been looking at what else. And I found Project Drawdown about a year ago, and it really, really spoke to me. So since then, I've been looking at what I can do to try and support the growth of the organisation in the UK. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about a new community I'm setting up called Drawdown UK. But let me just jump in and tell you a bit about Project Drawdown itself. So just got to get the right windows moving. What is Project Drawdown? Well, it's essentially a non-profit that was founded in 2014 in the US. It was set up by an environmentalist called Paul Hawken, an American gentleman, and they are seeking to help the world reach what they call drawdown. And that is a point where the carbon emissions will peak and then they'll start to fall. Now they're attempting to reach drawdown by mapping, measuring, and modelling the most substantive solutions to stop global warming, and then communicate these findings to the world. So they're doing this. So here's Paul Hawken. I should be moving this along as well. But how are they doing this? Well, in 2017, I think it was 2 years ago, they produced a book called Drawdown, and in there was this list of 100 top solutions to global warming. And the solutions initially were ranked on two criteria. First criteria was what impact each of these solutions would have if implemented at scale, and secondly, what money could be saved, what cost saving would be achievable if each of these solutions was implemented at scale. And they ranked them on these top two criteria. And then since then, they've been constantly reviewing and assessing the solutions. So the list has actually changed now. and there are 2 versions on their website. So I'm going to show you the first version. This is what they call scenario 1. Scenario 1 is where they rank the solutions based on how we would achieve, so we stop global warming close to 2 degrees of global warming. And then the second scenario is how we'd stop climate change close to 1.5. So you can see the list changes when we look at scenario 2 versus scenario 1. And then within the 100 solutions, they've also grouped the solutions into smaller kind of groups, let's call them, but they call them sectors. So there are 9 different sectors. And they also have another category, which is not on this list, called coming attractions, which features new technologies, which are not, not actually part of the main list, but instead they are kind of coming online, but not readily available yet. I'm just seeing people saying my notes are coming up instead of my slides. I feel like I'm covering this up then. I'm just going to...
there we go. Yeah.
Sorry, so I've got 2 windows open, but it must be showing both, not the one. Sorry, let me just quickly think about this, because I do need to see my notes, but I don't want to cover up what I'm showing as well. Just bear with me a second. I'll just quickly try and sort this out.
It's not the easiest platform to use, and SlideShare, it's quite a new platform, so maybe they'll bring in some changes to it to make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, what I can do, I know what I'm going to do. Let me just try and do this. So if I... Sorry, Jen, I just need to think about this, because I don't want to, I need to make sure people can see what I'm saying, but I don't want to... I see what's happening. You can see this. You can see the outline. You can't actually see what's on my notes. You can just see the outline of it. Is that right?
Well, now we're back onto just the slide.
Right.
And we can just see it peeking in at the side there, but that's fine.
Okay. I think I'm just have to carry on. The fact I can't see what else to do, but I do apologise to everyone. It's a little bit, not very professional to be able to see my notes as well. But I'll carry on.
What I did when I did a talk a couple of weeks ago was I would just sort of click on the PowerPoint icon in my menu bar at the bottom.
Yeah.
Go forwards, and then and I don't think people could sort of see that happening on the screen. I don't know. And then I could sort of go forwards on the. Did you just hear my son Bert then? And then I could go forwards on the boys, and then I could go forwards on the PowerPoint without it, and it would just show on the screen as the slide moving forwards. But I haven't explained that very well at all.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to get back to my camera and maybe look at where the screen sharing option is. Yeah, I don't want to mess around with this now, Jen. It's not fair everyone else watching. But no, don't worry. I'll just have to persevere, I think. So let's just move on. But that's Project Drawdown. And Project Drawdown UK is really all about trying to build a community here in the UK. So in the US, this is where it started. But our mission with Drawdown UK is to scale the drawdown solutions, to really help them grow and develop amongst people who are working on in the UK. And so I just want to be really clear, though. I am not part of Project Drawdown. I'm not paid by them. I'm not affiliated with them. But we are in communication because they are looking for people to pick it up and run with it in different parts of the world. And so what we're doing here is there are 4 parts to what we're trying to achieve with Drawdown UK is to educate people about different drawdown solutions. Secondly, is to raise awareness of these organisations working in the UK on the solutions. Thirdly, provide information for people, for maybe people looking to work in sustainability, looking to take actions in their own lives, how they can get involved in these different organisations who are working on the solutions. And lastly, we want to try and provide information for maybe investment opportunities. If you work for an investment company, if you have money that you want to invest in a positive way, that we're going to try and connect you again with organisations who are working on the solutions who are also open to funding. So that's Drawdown UK, and I'll provide some details a bit later of the different mediums we have where you can get involved in the community. But to get into the actual solutions, the first sector I'm going to quickly cover is buildings. So more than half the global population is now concentrated in urban areas. And by 2060, they say, or experts say, that 2/3 of us will be living in cities. So that's effectively going to be, sorry, I'm going to say it again, but yeah, by 2060, 2/3 will be living in cities. So we're effectively going to have to double the number of buildings, the global building stock that we have in the world. So if we do that, that is going to be effectively like adding a new New York City size, area of buildings every month for the next 40 years, which is a crazy amount of growth. And you can imagine the carbon footprint that will create. So the challenge is to try and build what we call net zero buildings. They basically produce less energy than they consume. There's also what we call living buildings, which are actually almost operate like a plant. They produce their own water and things like that. So that's the real challenge. But when Drawdown was first came out, they had the list of 100 solutions, and they had a very interesting number one. It was an unexpected number one that came at the top of the list, given the impact of implementing at scale and the cost saving that would be achieved. And the top solution they found in this initial list, that's now changed slightly because they've been remodeling it, but the top solution was refrigerant management. And I think, well, what is this? Well, refrigerant management refers to air conditioners. So if you think of all the air conditioning units we have in the world and all the buildings, they produce what we call HFCs. That was that was the product that was replaced what we used to call CFCs. You probably heard of CFCs. They were the gas that used to cause a problem by creating holes in the ozone layer, and that was phased out. Used to be in aerosols and other products. So they replaced them with these things called HFCs, which are better because they don't produce the same global warming or the hole in the ozone layer problem. But they are actually 1,000 to 9,000 times more damaging than CO2 in terms of heating and warming of the planet. So they've got huge impact potential. But what we normally find is that 90% of these emissions, these HFCs that are released from air conditioners, happen at the end of life. They're often disposed of, you're just dumped and the HFCs are released, but you can cleanly and safely actually dispose of the HFC if it's done properly. And they found that in terms of the impact at scale, if implemented with this solution, that would have the biggest impact. And as I say, that's slightly changed now, but it's still, I think, in the top 5. But it's not something we're really talking about. Before I had heard of Project Drawdown, I'd never even heard of this as an issue. So it's really great they're flagging this up. And another alternative solution in this area is alternative refrigerants, they call it. And that's replacing HFCs with natural refrigerants, things like propane, ammonia. They can also be put into air conditioning units, but they don't have the same carbon sort of footprint problems. So that's the building sector. There are many other solutions in the building sector. I do encourage you to go on the website and have a look on Project Drawdown's website. And then the next sector I'm going to look at is coastal and ocean sinks. Now, what's a sink, you might ask? Well, a sink refers to a process where instead of us trying to just restrict the amount of carbon we're putting up into the atmosphere through pollution, through transport, factories, other sources like that, sinks are where you actually try and take carbon out of the atmosphere. And nature has many processes where it does this for us, especially in a kind of coastal and ocean scenario. There's also land sinks, which is another sector in Project Drawdown. And there's also engineered sinks, which are ones that would just use technology to almost try and trap the carbon as it's released from manufactured technical solution. But yeah, we want to try and Project Drawdown is trying to do both. It's trying to stop us producing the carbon in the first place, but also looking at ways of how we can then another way of saying sequester it, take it out of the atmosphere. So that's the next sector we'll look at. So one of the or two of the solutions in this sector are around protecting coastal wetlands and restoring coastal wetlands. So we found that the coastal wetlands are, home to a lot of different kind of ecosystems. You've got feeding grounds for migratory birds. You've got nurseries for fish. They protect against storm, flood waters. They also filter water to make it cleaner. and they sequester the carbon both through the kind of shoots and leaves that go above the surface and above ground, but also in the roots. They lock it up effectively, so they absorb the carbon, and then the leaves will maybe eventually die and fall off and fall into the water, and then go down to the bottom of the ocean, and they'll stay there, and they'll lock the carbon they've absorbed into themselves, so it doesn't get released into the atmosphere. So we need to protect these existing coastal wetlands. And also, we need to restore the coastal wetlands that have already been damaged. For example, in the UK, we used to have huge numbers of seagrass meadows, but now over 90% of them have been damaged. And this has been through building ports and marinas. It's been built through dragging anchors along the seabed. And there's a great, one great project going on at the moment in UK, I should say, is the Seagrass Ocean Rescue Project. So they've got a 20-kilometre stretch of rope, which they're going to run along the coast down in Pembrokeshire. And they're going to have seeds, seagrass seeds in these tiny little bags attached to the rope, and they'll drop it onto the ocean floor, and that seagrass will start to sprout and start to grow back. And so we can start to restore these coastal wetlands. So it's a really, really important solution. Again, it's not that widely talked about as something we can do, but it can make a big difference. The other thing with these sinks is, and I'll talk about another sink shortly as well, but it's given the size of them, they have huge carbon storage, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. Now, I can't see the chat at all, so I'm just going to quickly jump to the chat and see if there's any questions. No, I can't see anything.
There's a couple of questions in the question box. So one says, if refrigeration is no longer number one, what is? Where can we find the most up-to-date list?
Yeah, very good question. So again, there's a number one in the two scenarios, one for 1.5 degrees of warming, one for 2 degrees of warming. And that list you can find on the drawdown.org website, which is the US organization. They've got the list. And again, that list might change, again, because these solutions, some of them are advancing in terms of the technologies and the applications. So the impact they can have is changing, either improving, increasing, or being overtaken. But yeah, have a look on the Drawdown website and you've got all the information there.
Brilliant. And then the other question is, do you think that massive population growth is inevitable? The data you showed us relating to cities is frightening. Technological solutions are great, but not addressing the core and a very contentious problem. And it is...
Absolutely. Yeah, very good question. And I'll ask you to hold that question, because one of the last sectors I'll talk about is health and education. And in there is a big part of the population growth, because you're absolutely right, it's critical. So I'll come back to that question, but thank you for asking. That's really good. Is there anything else in there, Jen?
That's it at the moment, thanks.
Brilliant, perfect, thank you for that. So jumping back to the presentation, so we're going to go on to the next sector, which is electricity. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, because I think everyone's more or less very familiar with different electrical solutions, but we need to remember electricity now is a daily part of our life. Having said that, though, 840 million people still don't have access to electricity, which is is crazy, really, in some ways. But electrification and the process of producing electricity currently accounts for 25% of heat trapping emissions globally. So it is something we need to do something about, and we need to look at a couple of questions. We need to look at how we can generate electricity for the whole world without burning fossil fuels, because the majority of electricity production is produced through fossil fuels. And the other side of it is looking at how we transmit, store, and use the electricity. Those systems we use to manage that need to change and need to be upgraded. So Drawdown really has 2 or 3 approaches. It's enhancing efficiency of the technologies, shifting the production away from a very centralized, large-scale system, and just improving the system generally. So I'm going to just talk about 2 solutions on the list. And again, there are lots and lots in this electricity area, so do have a look on the website and you'll be able to see some more information about that. But the first is dynamic glass, and the second is microgrids. So dynamic glass, we find that glass generally is far less insulating than walls. And obviously, if you imagine these buildings now that have just wall-to-wall glass all the way around, it makes them quite inefficient. So dynamic glass is a very, very special system that's been designed where they can actually run electricity or heat through the panes of glass they install, and that will actually allow it to respond to temperature, to heat, sorry, same thing, temperature, light, and there's one more, I can't remember what the solution was. It's thermodynamic, electrochemical, light exposure, heat exposure, and I think it's just reflectivity. I think that's the other one. But it means that as it gets hot, as the light comes up or the sun comes up, the glass can actually change color, and so it will mean it will trap in heat in winter. And in the summer, if the building is getting very hot, they can run an electric current through the glass, and it will take the opaqueness off. It will take the darkness of the glass off and allow light and heat to escape to try and cool the building. So it's a very, very, it's almost like turning a glass pane into a wall in some ways, but as and when it's needed. So that's a really interesting solution. And again, it's coming online. I wouldn't say it's readily available yet, and the costs are still quite high with that one. And then microgrids are another really interesting solution, and they're around looking at how we can decentralize the distribution of electricity. So at the moment, we have macro grids, which are the opposite of microgrids. Macrogrids are where you have these big electrical networks. They're usually kind of very centralized. They have maybe a power plant, and then they've got it's powered by fossil fuels. And then they've got backup generators, but it's all quite centralized, and then the electricity charge or has to travel quite a long way to get to where it's going. And along the way, the longer the cables are, the more electricity gets lost and during the process. So microgrids are looking at trying to make our energy system more local. And I think one thing that the coronavirus has really shown us is the kind of relative fragility of our lives and the systems that we use currently. I think that we didn't really appreciate before. So resilience is something a lot of companies and societies now trying to look at. How can we make ourselves more resilient? And I think microgrids are a great way to do that, because they're smaller local grids. Most of them are going to be powered by renewable energies, things like solar, wind, biomass, although biomass is a bit contentious, hydro, but it's also keeping the control of the electricity generation local. So again, you can put a solar panel on your roof and you can contribute to the microgrid around you, and it's just, you get far more benefit locally, and again, less loss of transmission because the electricity is not traveling so far as well. So again, this is another solution related to electricity, but again, it's slightly different from the general ones we hear about. Solar, which is obviously critical, wind, hydro, all those kind of solutions.
Alexander,
yeah,
there's a company that I'm trying desperately to think of the name of them, but basically, like, if you've got solar panels on your roof, or you can get solar panels and a battery, then they offer you this tariff whereby when energy demand is high, they basically pay you for your electricity, and it's kind of all done on these I can't remember what they call it, but sort of micro adjustments on the price of energy and things. So it's kind of basically using your stored energy from your battery to go into the grid when demand is high, and then you taking in energy from the grid when it's cheaper.
Right.
And just solutions like that, and their aim is to have this sort of network over the country of homeowners and their solar panels and things that are actually contributing, sort of tiny micro contributors to the grid, and that will help to sort of distribute demand and mean more renewables can go into the grid. So it's just a really interesting project.
Yeah, I'd love to know the name of that company, Jen, if you remember it.
Yeah, in my brain, and I will pop it in the chat when I remember.
Right. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to speed up a bit because I realize we're already 25 minutes past the hour, and I want to make sure we have lots of time to talk as well. So let me just move on. So I'm just going to very quickly talk about food, agriculture, and land use. This is, a massive solution, or massive sector rather, because we've made relatively big changes to our planet, and most of them have been around producing food, harvesting food, and currently agriculture and forestry contribute to 24% of greenhouse gases. So, the way Drawdown is organised its solutions around this area is they've looked at three parts. One is around addressing our waste and our diets. We can shift our diets and address food waste, and that would make a massive difference in terms of the carbon footprint of each individual person. And also they're looking at how we protect our existing ecosystems. And also changing agricultural practices, because there's lots of farming methods. Many of them are actually, hundreds of years old. Some of them come from indigenous peoples. Some of the best land practices and best land stewardship practices come from indigenous populations who've been looking after the land and living with the land rather than trying to just take from it, like the majority of the kind of agricultural systems look to do. So that's, you'll see in this sector, you'll see some of the solutions are going back to sort of century-old systems and learning from how we can live in harmony with the land, as opposed to just using it for our benefit. So, but what I want to talk about in terms of the solution, again, there are many in this sector, but is peatland protection and re-wetting. Now, I found this fascinating, and what I found really staggering about this is that peatlands, we think of as bogs. They're not particularly sexy. They're just mud with lots of water in, really. But these peatlands take hundreds of thousands of years to develop, and they're formed by basically plant matter decomposing and then getting locked into the ground. Now, these peatlands cover about 3% of the world's surface, the surface of the planet, just 3%. Yet they're only second to the oceans in terms of the amount of carbon that they store. And they're actually, I think it's there's twice as much carbon locked up in the peatlands of the world than there are in all of the forests of the world, which I find staggering. So 3% land coverage of the planet, yet they have twice as much carbon stored in them as all of the forests in the world. When you imagine how many forests there are. So their capacity for holding and storing carbon is huge. And luckily, we still have 85% of the world's peatlands intact. So we haven't damaged too many of them, but they're like chimneys. So because they're very wet, as soon as they start to dry out and be drained, like we sometimes do, because we try and build, houses on top of the land, the carbon starts to get released, and it's like a chimney pouring out. And if you imagine how much carbon stored in there, again, it's a massive contributor to emissions when that happens. So just protecting them, keeping it in the ground, keeping it in this sink, can be a massive contributor to reducing emissions. And also we want to re-wet them. There's a very special technique called re-wetting, where you again can add water and effectively lock up the carbon that's still in the ground that hasn't already been released. So we need to protect and then re-wet the existing land sinks. I'm going to actually be interviewing a gentleman from the peatland protection initiative running in the UK. It's called the IUCN UK Peatland Programme, because we started a podcast for Drawdown UK. So I'll be interviewing the director of that programme to talk more about this, because I just think it's a really fascinating subject. But let's go on to the last sector. I'm not going to cover all the sectors. I'm just going to do 5 today. And this is going to talk about population now. So health and education is one of the sectors covered in Project Drawdown. And what's interesting is we don't really talk often about climate change and global warming in relation to health and education. They're usually separate subjects sometimes, which is a bit of a fallacy, because currently we have 7.7 billion people on the planet, and the United Nations estimate by 2050 that number is going to increase to between 9.4 to 10.1 billion. So that's almost like a 25% increase. So we're going to have 25% more people on the planet. And all of these people are going to be eating, they're going to be building, they're going to be buying, they're going to be consuming, plugging in things into electricity, and they're going to interact with the primary drivers of emissions, which are production and consumption, both of which are largely fueled by fossil fuels at the moment. So this is something we need to really connect the dots with and bring together with climate change solutions. So I'm going to talk about the 2 elements that Project Drawdown mentions in its solutions. The first is looking at educating girls. So in some cultures, girls are taken out of education quite early. But if you keep a girl in education, she's going to come out a very, very different woman. She's going to come out someone who's better able to get a better job because she's better educated. She'll then be able to provide better for her family because she'll be able to earn more money. She'll be better educated about her health and how to look after herself, how to look after her family. She'll be better educated about how to earn a living. She'll have more options in terms of employment. She'll be able to, if she lives in an area where she can grow food, she'll be better educated about that. and she'll just be more resilient generally. So the key strategies to allowing girls to stay in education is, first of all, sorry, I just clicked on the wrong thing, is making schools more affordable, helping girls overcome health barriers, reducing the distance and the time that they live from schools, and also making schools more girl-friendly. Now, the other thing around education for girls is that you often find they have fewer, not always, but fewer and healthier children. And that's because the second part of Project Drawdown's health education solution is around family planning. When girls are educated about family planning, it's one of the most powerful levers available for actually avoiding carbon emissions, because it curbs population growth. But it's not so black and white as you might think, because it's not really about necessarily trying to reduce population numbers. It's about giving women the ability to choose whether they do have kids, and if they do, when they decide to become pregnant. Because a big problem is a lot of them don't have access to contraception when they need it, and in high-income countries as well, where there are a lot of unplanned pregnancies. So we're finding there's a big shortfall in funding between providing access to reproductive health care and allowing women who need it to access it. So it is a controversial subject, though, because there is a consensus that the more people we have on the planet, the bigger the impacts and the kind of bigger, what's the way to say it, the bigger footprint and strain it will place on the planet. But it's really about honouring the dignity of women and children through family planning, because we found that when you allow a woman to choose and have access to options, and give them, allow them to honour their expressed needs, it leads to empowerment, it leads to equality, it leads to well-being, and obviously a great side effect of that is a positive benefit for the planet. So, yeah, I think that's a really critical sector, which doesn't get talked about maybe so much as the others, but it's fundamental. And you'll see that these solutions are quite high near the top of the list when you go on the Drawdown website as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about, I'm just thinking whether I want to do this or not. I've got time. I'm going to very, very, very briefly talk about it. We've talked about different sectors. There is this other element called coming attractions. And coming attractions are solutions that are not yet readily available, but they are showing promise. And one of them is an interesting one called A Cow Walks Onto a Beach. Now, cows, as we know, produce methane. And if you imagine these huge cattle ranches in parts of South America and other parts of the world, millions of cows on these ranches, all of them producing methane. And I think they currently produce contribute about 6% of global emissions. But cows don't naturally produce methane. And about 100 years ago, a bacteria got into the gut of cows and started to cause a chemical reaction, and then started methane to be produced. Now, they found that if you feed a cow seaweed, it actually reduces the amount of methane it produces by between 70 to 90%, which is a huge, huge amount. So they're looking at this as a solution, to reduce the amount of methane produced amongst cattle and livestock generally. But it is early days, and I think that the key message about these coming attractions is that we need to take action now. We've got potentially like 10 years to really make a dent in the current situation, and some of these solutions, if they come through in the next 5, 10, 20 years, great. But all they're going to do is speed up the process we're already moving along. We need to take action with the current solutions we have available and really, really scale those quickly. So we can't rely too much on these coming attractions yet. Because again, people think, I've heard lots of people say, oh, well, I bet we're going to come up with some technology which will solve all of our climate solutions. Maybe we will. I hope we do. But until then, we've got to just work with what we've got, and we've got to work really aggressively. So that's the last part. And I just want to then move on to now just quickly talk about what Project Drawdown can do for you and how we can support Project Drawdown in the UK. So I've covered the 5 sectors, but the first part about Project Drawdown is they're looking at how we can change the language around the carbon footprint, carbon emissions situation, because there's a lot of angry rhetoric at the moment. There's a lot of war rhetoric, things like fighting the climate change, war against global warming. But people don't want to get into fights. People aren't interested in wars. They don't like that. It doesn't encourage them to take action. So Project Drawdown are trying to change and reframe how we talk about global warming. They're also looking at changing people's mindsets, and they're doing that by focusing on solutions. They don't want to talk about problems. Everyone seems to talk about the problem of global warming, problem of climate change. We know it's a problem, but when you talk about problems, it doesn't encourage people to take action. If you focus on solutions, that will encourage people to get up and actually start taking action. So they're very much focused, and the language they use is very deliberate to be focused on solutions. So how can you be solution focused? Well, let me just give you a couple of different scenarios. Some of these might apply to people listening. But one, you might be an employee of a company. So say you're an employee of a company and you want your company to start taking action of maybe around global warming. But what do you do? Well, the first thing I'd suggest you do is go to the list of Drawdown solutions and look through that list and maybe look at some that you think your company could implement. You know, I just picked 8 when I looked at the list. You've got things like getting a green roof. You've got things like telepresence, which is the solution around, you know, instead of traveling, we just do everything by Zoom or by mediums like this. Looking to implement that as a kind of solution for your company. Again, but presenting it as a solution. What problem would that solve for your company? Well, it would save them money. It would save, you know, if any of them are signed up to the carbon credit scheme where they have to measure their emissions, again, that would be a way for them to reduce their emissions as a company. Things like carpooling, starting to share journeys. There's lots of solutions in there. And again, presenting them to your company as a solution rather than as a complaint, we're not doing enough, complaining, start giving them solutions and present it that way. That's what it would look like. So that's one scenario where you're an employee of a company, say. Another idea might be you want to work in sustainability. So say you want to get a job in sustainability. You might work for a company now who, you know, isn't anything to do with sustainability, but you want to get into that sector. Well, you might not want to leave your job right now, given the current situation. It just might not be the sensible thing to do. But this is something you could start doing, you know, while you're still in your current job. Again, go to the solutions, look through the list, and try and look out for one that really speaks to you, excites you, really interests you. You know, for example, you might go to the list and you might see walkable cities and think, God, I love the idea of walkable cities, but I don't know anything about it. Well, what I'd suggest is go and educate yourself about walkable cities, find out what it involves, how you make them, and then look at who's working on the solution currently. Go and find out about those people, find out where they're working, and then find out what they need, find out what their biggest challenge is currently, and start trying to provide them value. Or you might want to set up your own version of it and start, you know, running the solution yourself. And also, you know, invite them to join the Drawdown UK community. I'd like to know what they want. I'd like to know what their problem is, their challenges, because maybe if they've got a challenge with walkable cities, maybe around, I don't know, street planning, we could maybe connect them up with someone who's working on electric cars as a Drawdown solution, and they might be having a problem with street planning too. They might have a lawyer they're working with who could also help the person you're speaking to. So we want to try and bring people together who've got maybe the same challenges and connect resources, connect people, and connect ideas. So we're all working on the same thing together and supporting each other. So that's another approach. And then lastly, one more scenario is if you want to just make changes at home. Again, you've got a family maybe, or you just want to make changes in your flat or your house. Again, look at the Drawdown list. Again, and start looking at what solutions you can implement. You know, maybe just getting your house insulated or retrofitted. Maybe look at getting an electric car. Look at starting to compost. But again, try and look at it from a solution-focused perspective. You know, I lived in a house or a flat a couple of years ago. We had single panes and wooden frames in the windows. It was freezing the first winter we were there. So I went to our landlady and said, "Look, are you looking to sell this house eventually?" And she said, "Yeah." So I said, "Well, you know, you could increase the value that you'll get for your property when you eventually sell it if you put in some double glazing." And I said, "Look, obviously that would benefit us now, but I tried to present it to her as a solution rather than me complaining about the cold, complaining that I wanted her to do something." And she did. She went and installed double glazing, and then she eventually sold a house a couple of years later. So it's trying to pitch and present everything we do as solutions and be solution focused. So that's almost it. And this is how you can get involved in Drawdown UK as our community. We've got lots of different socials. So please have a look at any of those that you're already on, and do feel free to join. We've got a group on LinkedIn. We've got a group on Facebook. And then I'd love to hear now more from people who are on the call or in the session about I've got 3 questions, but I don't know if we want to go through questions that people have asked, Jen, before we jump into my questions.
Yeah, I think there's just one other one that's come up. So you talked about population growth, and one point I just wanted to make there that I don't know if anyone's read Mike Berner's Lee book, How Bad Are Bananas? And he goes through the kind of the carbon footprint of everything. And in there, he talks about, the carbon footprint of having a child. And obviously it's quite large, but actually the carbon footprint of somebody in the developing country of their child is significantly lower than the carbon footprint of, say, an A-list celebrity. So it's not necessarily how many children you have as an individual or how many children collectively they are. It's how those children are raised and how much they consume effectively. So I thought that was quite an interesting point. And then Michael's asked, are the Project Drawdown actions linked with the UN Sustainable Development Goals in any meaningful way?
Not that I've seen. But I mean, there's lots of overlaps, as you can see, just by looking through the list. I mean, it's all working towards the same goal, but I don't think there's any official affiliation that I've read about or seen anywhere. No.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, if you want to head on.
Great, I'd love to know. So here's my questions. I'm first of all interested, what had people come along today, and what, maybe if you either had already heard of Project Drawdown, you didn't know anything about it, what, how did people come to the session first of all? I'm just interested to know what brought people along.
So guys, what sort of made you look at this session and think, oh, that sounds really interesting, or had you already heard of Project Drawdown, or had you not? And what you were, I guess, what you kind of hoping to get out of it. So pop those in the comments. What's the next question?
The next question is, so should we go back to my, what drawdown solutions are people particularly interested in, and why?
Brilliant. So Fran's saying she has the Project Drawdown book, and the climate action is her biggest interest area in sustainability. So always love hearing more about it. Caroline didn't know anything about it and was interested in how to save carbon. Michael didn't know of it, interested to know what to prioritise and why. Is interested to hear about broader global solutions. Jane's seen it referenced on 2040. Is that the film, Jane? I've yet to watch that. Adrian says it's new to him. Kerry hasn't heard of it before. Understanding what we can do as individuals. And I think for my personal perspective, that's the I haven't connected hugely with Project Drawdown, because when I see things like it saying, oh, the top impact we can do is refrigeration, I don't feel like I can personally do that much about that. But when we start to then talk about food waste, or as you say, insulating our homes and things, that's when I can connect a bit more. But
I think it's just the point to make on that, Jen. It's a very good point. You're right. And I think some of the industrial solutions, you think the large scale, you think, well, what can I do about that? But I think so Paul Hawken, the guy who created Project Drawdown, he said something which I thought was really good. He said, the one thing about global warming is that there isn't one thing we can do. Everyone's looking for the silver bullet. I think someone asked, what's the large scale solution? I mean, look, there are large scale solutions, but we need everybody to be doing everything. And that's what actually really spoke to me about Project Drawdown, is that you've got 100 solutions and there's something there for everybody. I mean, I challenge you to find something on the list that doesn't inspire one person, so that's what I like about it. And I'd say to what you just said, Jen, is like, find something on the list that really does speak to you and pursue that aggressively. Do everything you can to make that, scale that solution. And we need people doing that for all 100.
Yeah, brilliant. So lots of people saying, they hadn't heard of it before or just wanted to find out more. And then, sorry, what did you say the second question was?
No, you're fine. That's it. So that was the second question. What are the drawdown solutions you're interested in? Why? And then the last one is just, what actions? Because I saw you post something on Facebook today, Dan. I thought it's great. I mean, it's great coming along, but we don't want people to be watching TV in some ways. We want people to take action. So I'm just interested what people see they can do, off the back of this session, what they're encouraged to go and what actions they're encouraged to go and take.
Definitely, and that's going to be a theme throughout the festival. Is what are your actions after each? You might not have an action after each session that you come to, but if you do, jot them down. And I'm just going to post a link if I've got it to. I've started this board that's called a Padlet, I think, and it's basically people can come and put their pledges on there of the actions that they're going to take. So I'll pop that link on there.
Great.
Yeah, let's hear. Just pop in the chat there. What is the, is there one thing that you're going to take away and you're going to do from that? And as I will reiterate this message again and again. It doesn't have to be the perfect solution. It does, it could be the smallest step. It could be, I'm going to go and look on the Project Drawdown thing and pick out the actions that speak to me. Let's just make this as kind of small as possible and as easily doable as possible. Brilliant. Emma says the link didn't work, bugger.
Can I just read a couple of comments?
Yeah, go
I'm just reading. So there's one I've just read. The lady Becca, she said, it's not something I've heard of. Project Drawdown is not something I've heard of, but I find knowing how my individual action can help in particular, it makes you feel in control in a situation that can often feel like you can't do anything about it. So I think it's a really good point. And if you can see individual actions you can take, and I think also it's feeling you're taking actions as part of a group, as a collective. You're not alone. There's lots of other people out there in the world taking actions as well. And I think that's why, what you've done with this this whole week, Jen, is going to connect a lot of people and provide a community for people to feel they're not alone anymore. Because they might, I don't know you, but I've got friends and family who you talk to them about global warming and climate change, and you can just see they switch off. And it's and I'm probably in the minority in my family and friends in some ways. Now some of them will start talking to me immediately about climate change because they sort of feel guilty, I think, as soon as they see me, because I remind them a little bit of stuff. And I'm sure that's the experience other people have as well. Do you find that, Jen?
Oh, definitely. I've somebody in the playground dropping the kids off, obviously pre-lockdown, oh, I'm really sorry it's in a plastic bag, or and it's just like, oh man, you don't have to, you're not being judged or anything like that. I just want to be able to have these conversations much more easily, and for it to be something that we're all, we love talking about the weather. Well, let's share more easily some of the easy solutions that we're doing in a really kind of non-judgmental way. Right, there's a couple of other questions. Can you have sustainable compost production from peat?
Yeah, that's a really good. Do you know that's one of my questions I'm going to ask when we do the podcast, because that's such a good question, isn't it? Because you see, peat as a source of compost, and I think if you're going to cut up peat and take it out of the ground, I mean that's how you destroy peatlands. So I don't know is the answer, if I'm honest, but the logical answer for me is like no. But that's one of my questions, because I think it's a really good point. Yeah,
and there's a lot of campaigning within the sort of gardening world to encourage people to buy peat-free compost. And I'm just gobsmacked that if you go into a garden centre that they're still allowed to sell that. Why is it not just banned?
I know.
And so do read your labels carefully.
Definitely. There's another very good comment here, Jen. I've just said the lady called Diane Hardman. She says, I'm going to take more of an interest in my employees' values and see if there are any solutions I can put forward. I think that's really critical. I think finding out, that's how you present a solution, or present it as a solution, as an opportunity. You find out what the values of your company are. Because I saw this other webinar the other week, and a gentleman on there was talking about the coronavirus presents a really good opportunity for companies to decide how they want to be seen in the world, because people are really paying attention now to what companies are doing, what actions they're taking. So it's an opportunity to rewrite a company's values and decide how going forward you want to be seen in the world. Do you care about your employees? Do you care about your customers? Do you care about the planet? And if you can either encourage your company to change or find out what their values are, and then link these solutions and offer them as an opportunity for them to demonstrate their values through action, I think that's the way you'll sell it. And I think that's how you'll get them to get on board.
Definitely. And Emma's going to be talking about this a lot more later on in the week. And then there's a question, how can governments be engaged with these solutions, or is it up to us? And Linda's commented on it saying, try first at the local level. So has your local authority declared a climate emergency? And if so, ask to see their net zero action plan, which is, it's all very well companies or governments or authorities declaring climate emergencies, isn't it? But what we really want is the action that comes out of that. Have you got anything on how we can engage sort of local and national government, Alexander?
Yeah, well, I just say before I answer that, I'm just going to say something else, because I think I heard actually a gentleman from Project Drawdown talk about this, and he was saying something quite interesting that I hadn't considered before. But he was saying, look, politicians from all parts of the world, they pay attention to opinion polls. They pay attention to polls of any type. When they want to find out what people care about, what people want. And at the moment, I think I get a lot of pushback saying, oh, well, the government should be, in my zero waste work, the government should be pushing on the companies to reduce the amount of plastic in the products we buy, and it's the government's responsibility. But the gentleman who I heard was making the point that actually governments and politicians do what the majority of people want them to do, because they want to stay in power. They need to have the popular opinion, and they need to act on the popular opinion. So I think us putting it all on the government is the right approach, but I think we also need to start focusing more on actually creating a critical mass as a group, like canvassing and working with the people around us in our companies, in our communities, in our families. And then when we've got enough people, the government will of course do what we want, because that's what everyone's telling them to do. So I think it's changing the context a little bit. And I hadn't thought of that before, and I thought it was a good point.
There was a really interesting study out a few years ago that said that apparently the reason why most MPs weren't taking more action on the climate crisis was because they weren't hearing from their constituents that it was a problem. And I'm sure now that has probably changed with Extinction Rebellion and all those sorts of things. But that's another place where we can use our power as individuals, is to to lobby our politicians. And that sounds all a bit like, oh God, I don't want to sit and have to write a letter. But you can tweet them. You can look. There's a website called They Work For You, and you can look. Find out who your MP is if you don't know. You can look at what their voting record is on various issues and things. And so and then you can just say, there's a bill coming up. I'd love to know how you're going to vote on that. And the more they hear from us, and it's the same with businesses, the more they hear from us that this is something we care about, as you say, we will reach that critical mass, and they'll kind of have to take action. Yeah.
And the great, there's lots of online petition websites as well. If you haven't already signed up to those, get on those, because they're constantly sending me petitions that I can sign, or I can just have a template for to paste in an email to my MP. Yeah. So that's just an easy way to do it as well. Yeah, that's great.
Brilliant. Right, I think we're going to have to wrap up. There's still lots of stuff in the chat. So if Alexander, I think you're in the group, aren't you? If people can come and find the thread that's got your talk on it, and if they have got any more questions, it'd be lovely if you, were able to just pop in and answer them.
Of course.
The replay should be available as soon as we end this call, and all the links and things you should still be able to see in the chat. Let's see some of those actions. I don't know if anybody's been brave enough to be the first one to put their pledge up on the but I'll go and put one up if nobody has. And thank you so much, Alexander. It's kind of fascinating, and it's really good to know that there's some really solid science behind some of these things as well. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you so much.